On November 12, 2025, two men stood in suits on the floor of the United States Mint in Philadelphia and watched a machine do something it had done billions of times before: stamp out a penny. Except this time, it did it 5 times and stopped forever. 232 years of American coinage. Done. And the reason you were given was simple. It costs too much to make. $85 million a year in losses. Wasteful, inefficient, a relic. Time to go. That's the story you were told. Here's the problem. That story doesn't hold up. Not when you look at what America actually gets from that $85 million. Not when you look at what replaced the penny and what it costs. The penny wasn't killed because it was wasteful. The following is the real story of the American penny, and the case for why it should have never died, and how you could still influence what happens next. Because even though the Treasury says they've stopped making them, it's not really dead. At least, not yet. Mind your business. Benjamin Franklin was a man who had opinions about money. He wrote about it, he philosophized about it, he coined, and that word is doing real work here, some of the most enduring phrases about it in the English language. A penny saved is a penny earned. That's Franklin. And in 1787, when the brand new United States of America needed its first official coin, they turned to him. What he designed tells you everything about how he saw the world. On the front, a sundial. Above it, the sun. To the left, one Latin word, fugio. It means I flee, as in time is fleeting. Time flies, don't waste it. And below the sundial, in plain block letters, Franklin's personal instruction to every American who would ever hold this coin. Mind your business. On the back, 13 chain links, one for each of the original colonies. And in the center, 3 words, we are one. This was America's founding philosophy, stamped into a piece of copper the size of a thumbnail. Thrift, unity, the value of time, the importance of work. And here's a detail almost nobody talks about. That first penny was minted from copper bands that had been holding together French gunpowder kegs, the ammunition France sent to help America win its revolution. The first American penny was literally made from the materials of the war that made America possible. The U.S. Mint took over official penny production in 1793, and that first coin was enormous, nearly the diameter of a modern $50. It was heavy. It was serious. They called it the large cent, and Americans carried it for 64 years as the design shifted through chains, wreaths, eagles, and various interpretations of Lady Liberty. In 1857, they shrank it. The large cent was retired. This was the last time before 2025 that the United States actually eliminated a coin from circulation. The new penny was smaller and lighter, and Americans seemed to have approved it. Then came the Indian head penny in 1859. Then another change in 1909, Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday. For the first time in American history, a real person appeared on a United States coin. Not an allegory, not a symbol. A man who had lived, governed, and been assassinated. That face stayed on the penny for the next 116 years. Through 2 world wars, through the Great Depression, when a penny actually bought something real, through the post-war boom, through the digital age, and through it all, Lincoln kept staring off to the right. The penny became more than currency. It became ritual. You threw one in a fountain and made a wish. You dropped one in the tray at the gas station counter. You found one on the sidewalk and decided, depending on which side was up, whether your day was about to get better or worse. But more than ritual, it was a tool, a precise tool of commerce that gave every American, regardless of income, regardless of whether they had a bank account or a credit card or a smartphone, the ability to pay exactly what something cost. Not approximately, not rounded, exactly. That precision wasn't an accident. It was the point. Franklin put it right there on the coin. Mind your business. Every cent matters. Account for everything. Leave nothing on the table. The penny was built on that principle from day one. For what it's worth. So let's talk about the number that killed the penny, at least according to the official telling. $85 million. That's what it cost the United States government in 2024 to produce pennies. The coin cost 3.69 cents to make and is worth 1 cent. The math, they said, was simple, and the talking heads repeated it endlessly. It was wasteful, embarrassing, indefensible. Except, let's put that number in context. The United States Department of Defense budget in 2024 was $886 billion, which means the Pentagon spent more money every single hour of every single day than the penny cost the government in an entire year. The entire annual cost of the penny, every press, every blank, every truck that delivered them to every Federal Reserve Bank in the country, amounts to roughly less than an hour of Defense Department spending. We didn't eliminate the penny because of fiscal responsibility. Fiscal responsibility would have looked very different. Now let's look at what that $85 million actually bought. In 2024, the Mint produced 3,200,000,000 pennies. Those coins gave every American who uses cash the ability to pay the exact price of what they were buying. Not an approximation, the exact price. Some economists who studied countries that eliminated their lowest denomination coins, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, found something the anti-penny crowd never liked to advertise. Rounding isn't neutral. Rounding, of course, up or down, would have to occur when you remove the 1 cent. You've got something that costs $5.04. You're going to have to either go to $5.05 or down to $5 flat. Transactions statistically skew toward rounding up more often than rounding down. The Richmond Federal Reserve confirmed this. They put a number on it. American consumers will collectively pay approximately $6 million more per year in what they call the rounding tax, now that the penny is gone. So we spent $85 million to produce the penny, and then handed $6 million a year in new costs directly to consumers, specifically the consumers who pay in cash, in exchange for that savings. But it gets worse, because the penny's death immediately increased demand for nickels. Every nickel the government mints loses the Treasury nearly 9 cents, almost twice the loss per coin of the penny it replaced. And now we need more of them. The penny was not an irrational expense. It was infrastructure, the same way a road costs money to maintain, and nobody calls it wasteful just because it doesn't generate a profit. The penny was the infrastructure of precise democratic commerce, available to every American equally, regardless of how they paid. And we tore it up because it cost the equivalent of an hour of Pentagon spending. Sorting through time. While Washington was debating whether the penny was worth 1 cent, a few 100,000 Americans had already figured out it was worth 3.5. They didn't need a congressional study. They didn't need a Government Accountability Office report. They needed a postal scale, a spreadsheet, and a working knowledge of the 1982 composition change, the year the government quietly switched the penny from 95% copper to 97.5% zinc because copper prices were rising and the old coins were becoming worth more as metal than as money. On one side of 1982 was a coin that is essentially a small copper ingot with Abraham Lincoln's face on it. And on the other side of that year, a zinc disc with a copper veneer so thin it corrodes from the inside out. Same size, same face value, completely different physical reality. The people who found that seam are called coin roll hunters, and they have been quietly and methodically operating a form of private mining inside the federal money supply for over a decade. The method is unglamorous. You go to a bank, you withdraw rolls of pennies, you sit at a table and sort by date. Pre-1982 goes in one pile, post-1982 goes in another. You then return the zinc to a different bank. You keep the copper. You do it again tomorrow. At current copper prices, over $14,000 per ton in 2026, a pre-1982 penny contains approximately 3.5 cents of recoverable metal. At scale, a 5-gallon bucket of pre-1982 pennies holds roughly 30 pounds of copper worth considerably more than the face value. The people doing this are not confused about the math. They are executing a carry trade against the federal government's own monetary infrastructure. And now the government has stopped making the penny entirely, which means the supply of copper pennies entering the sorting infrastructure is no longer being replenished. The pre-1982 coins are a finite, dwindling resource, which makes every one of them more valuable, which makes the incentive to divert them larger, which makes the absence of oversight more conspicuous. Even though they stopped making the penny, they can't melt them and sell the copper for scrap, at least not since 2006. That's when the Treasury instituted restrictions in response to the spike in copper prices around that time. Even though the U.S. Mint stopped making pennies, the rule against melting them down is still in place. So if you still can't melt them, then why are they hoarding them? Well, because they saw what happened in other countries after other 1 cent coins were phased out, and they're simply making a bet, which is that the restrictions on melting down the penny for scrap will be lifted. The rounding tax. Let's talk about who uses cash. Not in the abstract, not as a concept, but actually, who in America is still paying for things with physical currency in 2026? According to the Federal Reserve's own data, cash accounted for 14% of all consumer transactions in 2024. That sounds small until you remember that the United States processes hundreds of billions of transactions every year. 14% of that is an enormous number of people making an enormous number of purchases. And the Federal Reserve broke it down further. 70% of all cash transactions are for amounts under $10. Small purchases. A cup of coffee, a newspaper, well, if you could find one, a bottle of water, a bus fare, a sandwich, the daily commerce of ordinary life. Now ask yourself who makes small cash purchases in 2026. Not people with Apple Pay. Not people with rewards credit cards earning points on every transaction and also paying interest on those transactions. Not people with a linked bank account and a tap-to-pay watch on their wrist. The Americans still paying cash for small purchases are disproportionately the Americans who are unbanked or underbanked. According to the FDIC, millions of American households have no bank account at all. Millions more have an account but rely primarily on cash for daily spending. These are working people. People in rural areas where card readers are unreliable. Elderly Americans on fixed incomes who have managed their money in cash their entire lives. Immigrants, seasonal workers, people for whom a bank account is not a given. These are the people that the penny and physical cash protected. Here is what precision pricing means to someone spending carefully. If you are budgeting every dollar, and I mean every dollar, not as a figure of speech, but as a lived daily reality, the difference between paying $1.97 and paying $2 is not trivial. That 3-cent difference multiplied across dozens of transactions a week, across 52 weeks a year, adds up to real money. Money that, a rounding rule, just transferred from your pocket to a retailer's register. $6 million a year transferred from the people paying to the businesses collecting. If you pay with a credit card, a debit card, a phone, a watch, your transaction is calculated to the exact cent. The penny's elimination does not affect you at all, or does it? And it is worth noting, electronic transactions are still calculated to the penny. Your credit card statement still shows charges of $4.97. The penny didn't disappear from digital commerce. It disappeared from cash commerce, which means the penny, the unit of precise measurement, still exists for people who don't need it, and no longer exists for the people who needed it the most. Benjamin Franklin put it on the coin from the very beginning. Mind your business. Every cent matters. The cost of cards. But let's get back to those cards. Because, yes, you might be paying precisely the amount it shows, but there's actually a hidden cost. Because studies also show that when you remove a currency from circulation, a denomination, then people naturally will go more and more towards digital, toward credit cards, toward debit cards. When a customer cannot make exact change in cash because the penny is gone and the register cannot give back 1 cent, the path of least resistance is a card. Tap to pay, swipe, and you're done. No rounding, no awkward moment at the register, no digging through a wallet for coins that may not exist anymore. The transaction settles to the exact cent, as it always has, and everyone moves on. But each time a card is swiped or tapped, retailers are charged fees by card processing companies. In 2023 alone, those companies collected more than $172 billion in payment processing fees, most of which gets passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. That number, $172 billion, doesn't go to the government. It doesn't go to the merchant. It flows to Visa, MasterCard, the issuing banks, and the payment processors sitting invisibly in the middle of every transaction. And the transition away from the penny will only increase the use of digital payment methods and the accompanying fees. But that is only the cost the merchant absorbs. The cardholder pays separately, and the structure of those costs is worth understanding clearly. The first layer is interest. The average annual credit card interest rate hit a record 22.8% in 2023, up from 12.9% a decade earlier. And the average rate ran 14.3 percentage points above the prime rate, compared to 9.6 points above prime in 2013, giving banks a record profit margin on the spread. That gap between what banks pay to borrow money and what they charge cardholders to borrow from them has widened steadily for a decade. The second layer is who actually pays that interest. Not everyone. About half of cardholders are revolvers, people who carry a balance from month to month. But cardholders in prime or below credit tiers are almost 4 times more likely to revolve than subprime cardholders. In plain language, the people least able to pay off their balance in full each month are the ones subsidizing the rewards points and airline miles that wealthier cardholders collect and redeem. The third layer is annual fees. The average annual fee for cards that have an annual fee reached a record $105 as of 2022, up from $62 in 2015. Put it together and the picture sharpens considerably. A low-income consumer who previously paid cash for small purchases and who now reaches for a card because pennies are scarce and rounding feels arbitrary is entering a financial system that is specifically structured to extract value from people who carry balances. The penny's disappearance is a small nudge, but small nudges applied to hundreds of millions of people, repeated across billions of transactions, in the direction of a product with a 22% interest rate, are not small in their aggregate effect. Nobody at Visa or MasterCard lobbied to eliminate the penny, at least not that I could find, but they'll benefit nonetheless, with the consumer paying the price. Is there really a penny shortage? The penny isn't being made anymore, but it didn't disappear. There are an estimated 250 billion pennies still in circulation in the United States right now. 250 billion. That is more than 700 pennies for every single American man, woman, and child in the country. They are in jars on kitchen counters, in cup holders and cars, in a glass I put right there so you could see it, in the backs of dresser drawers, in piggy banks, in the cushions of sofas, in boxes and garages that haven't been opened since 2004. They are legal tender, and they are not sitting still, because the moment the mint stopped producing them, 250 billion pennies stopped being pocket change and started being a commodity. And three very different groups of people understood that immediately and started moving. Technically, there's still plenty of pennies to go around, but the moment they stopped making them, people reacted as people always have when something that was continuously supplied suddenly stopped being made. They started hoarding and treated it like a commodity instead of currency. The Treasury makes no sense. Congress created the penny by an act of Congress, specifically the Coinage Act of 1965, Public Law 89-81, which established the modern framework for American coin denominations and was enacted as a statute at large. It authorized the 1-cent coin with congressional specificity that goes well beyond a general permission. The diameter, the weight, the metallic composition, and whose face appears on the obverse are all legislated. Congress did not merely allow the penny to exist in the abstract. It specified the thing down to the gram. A president cannot undo that by announcement. A social media post does not repeal a public law. Despite the public reports, that's not exactly what the administration claimed to have done. What Treasury later argued was narrower and more strategic. Not that the president had personally repealed the coin, but that the Secretary of the Treasury already possessed authority under existing law to mint and issue coins only in amounts necessary to meet the needs of the United States. Treasury's own frequently asked questions response cited that delegated statutory authority and concluded that the Secretary had determined continued penny production was no longer necessary to meet those needs. In other words, the legal theory was not that the executive branch had canceled the denomination created by Congress. It was that the executive branch had made a necessity judgment about how many of that denomination to produce. And they decided 0 being that number. But this makes no sense. Pun intended. Treasury's own justification for stopping production was that there were already enough pennies in circulation. The American Bankers Association estimated 250 billion of them. The Mint itself cited 300 billion. The supply argument was, we do not need to make more because there are already more than enough. And then, almost immediately, there were not enough. Pennies began disappearing from circulation the moment people understood that no new ones were coming. Hoarders accelerated their sorting, coin roll hunters stripped bank rolls with new urgency. The Federal Reserve began limiting penny orders at regional distribution centers. Retailers found their cash stores running short. Major chain stores with more than 1,000 locations reported having no pennies at all. The very people Treasury had insisted would be fine, cash-dependent consumers, lower-income households, the unbanked, found themselves standing at registers where the math no longer worked, and the only frictionless option was a card. The Treasury had looked at 300 billion pennies and concluded they were enough. What they had not accounted for is that a coin in a jar is not a coin in circulation. It is a coin in retirement, and the announcement that no more were coming was precisely the signal that made hundreds of billions of hoarded pennies stay exactly where they were, because now they were worth keeping. Who might benefit? The current state of things is a decision by Treasury to stop making pennies, but there are some in Congress trying to make it lasting by passing a law. The proposed Common Sense Act, again, I guess pun intended, which has not been passed into law as of this taping, presents itself as a straightforward fiscal housekeeping measure. Stop minting a coin that costs nearly 4 cents to make. Save taxpayers money and move on. But the bill's co-sponsors offer some clues worth examining about who else might have an interest in the end of America's smallest unit of physical currency. And I'm not talking about the hoarders and credit card companies I already mentioned earlier. The Senate version of this bill is led by two lawmakers who have spent years as Washington's most prominent champions of cryptocurrency, Wyoming Republican Cynthia Lummis and New York Democrat Christian Gillibrand. Their partnership on crypto legislation predates the Common Sense Act by years. Together, they authored the Responsible Financial Innovation Act, the first comprehensive congressional attempt to build a regulatory framework for digital assets. Lummis has gone further still, introducing the Bitcoin Act, legislation that would direct the U.S. Treasury to acquire 1 million bitcoins over 5 years as a strategic national reserve. She chairs the Senate Banking Subcommittee on Digital Assets. She has publicly disclosed holding Bitcoin personally. Gillibrand, meanwhile, received more than $200,000 in donations during the 2024 election cycle from individuals associated with major crypto firms. None of that makes the Common Sense Act a crypto bill. The fiscal argument for eliminating the penny is real, at least some people say, and it predates cryptocurrency entirely. But it is worth noting that the legislators that are most invested in building a digital currency future are the same ones trying to make a law to end America's smallest unit of physical cash. A Forbes piece from October 2025 framed the moment in explicitly crypto terms, arguing that Bitcoin's satoshis and regulated stablecoins were now ready to fill the void left by the disappearing cent. But with most everything else in Washington, there's no explicit link between crypto and the effort to kill the penny. So the best I could do was try to read the tea leaves while making sure to show my work. But if there is an effort by crypto people to get rid of the penny, can't we all just get along? The last penny. So let's go back to the beginning one more time. A new country, no central bank, no financial infrastructure of any kind. And Benjamin Franklin, the man who understood money as well as any founder, sits down to design the first coin of the United States. He could have put anything on it, an eagle, a president, a sword, a declaration. He put a sundial, and a clock, and a warning. Time flies. Mind your business. He was not being folksy, although sometimes he was. But in this instance, he was being precise. Franklin understood that a currency is not just a medium of exchange. It is a statement of values. It is a government telling its citizens, this is what we think matters. This is what we think commerce should look like. This is the unit of measurement we are all agreeing to share. And the unit he chose was 1 cent, the smallest meaningful denomination, the thing that makes all other prices precise, the foundation of the entire pricing structure of American commerce. For 232 years, that foundation held. Then in February 2025, a president typed 11 words into his phone and instructed his Treasury Secretary to stop making them. No law, no vote, no public debate worth the name. A social media post. And the argument used to justify it, $85 million in annual losses. But that argument dissolves the moment you put it in any honest context. The hour of DoD spending, the rounding tax that will cost consumers real money, the increased switch to cards that will increase transaction costs, the increased costs of nickel production erodes the savings further, and the transition costs to retailers, banks, and coin infrastructure nationwide cost money that nobody is counting in the official ledger. The penny did not cost $85 million a year. It's worth far more than that in pricing precision, in commercial equity, in the protection it gave to the Americans who needed it most. The collector market is pricing the last pennies like artifacts. The government is selling commemorative versions for $20 a piece. The penny, officially known as the 1 cent coin, is not a story about nostalgia. This is not about sentiment or tradition or the way a penny feels between your fingers, although it does have its place. This is about what a society decides to protect and what it decides to abandon, and whether the reasoning it gives for that decision is honest. The difference is not math. The difference is who benefits. Benjamin Franklin designed the first American penny from the copper of French gunpowder kegs, the ammunition of a revolution. He put a clock on it to remind you that time is fleeting. He put a chain of 13 links on the back to remind you that we are one. And he put those 3 words on the front that turned out, in the end, to be less of a personal philosophy and more of a prophecy. Mind your business. But without the penny, it's going to be harder to do. So a little postscript about this. Currently, officially, the penny has stopped production, but the penny still exists as physical currency. The bill talked about earlier in the episode is still just a bill. It's not law. So what you can do if you want to change things, you actually could. You could call your congressman